Welcome to the Current Word on this Thanksgiving edition of the Current Word here on WSHO Sunshine 800 AM. I am your humble holiday host, Trey Roberts, sitting in for Kathleen Benfield on this Thursday edition, this Thanksgiving edition, this holiday edition of Thanksgiving. And I hope you are just as thankful as I am. Super thankful. Got a really thankful show for you today. So hopefully you pick up on the theme. I have a lot to get to, so I want to jump right into this. Obviously, everyone is not listening. Everyone is napping. Everyone has had turkey. Everyone is overdosing on melatonin. And so some of this is for posterity's sake. But for those of you who are listening out there, thank you for listening. We are live at WSHO. You can also go to WSHO.com. And you can jump in the chat room there like I'm about to do as I am talking to you right now. I seem to always forget to do this, so I'm going to scroll down and put in your name so that we know who you are. Sign in, hit refresh, scroll up, and there you are. So, so I'm sitting in for the vacationing Kathleen Benfield, and thank you to Kathleen always for letting me sit in her big chair and do the show. Love doing it. Got my own show on Saturdays. Hoping you'll tune in to that on Saturdays at 11 a.m. That's the Rock Worldwide Show with yours truly, Trey Roberts. One of the things I like to do, and this is just another opportunity to do that, is to bring you some good information. By the way, we are also live on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Just go to Kingdom Useful, at Kingdom Useful. And if you want to be a part of the program, you can call us in live, 504-527-0800, 504-527-0800. I heard an interview the other day. Let me reset this for a second. One of the things that I want to try to do on a regular basis is bring good information. I want to bring a sober-mindedness to the table. I enjoy, just as much as most, I enjoy good information and thinking well about things, and I know this listening audience does too, so this is just a wonderful fit. I heard Bari Weiss, who used to be the editor the chief editor for the editorial page or the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal, and then she went to the New York Times, and then she resigned in what was pretty controversial. So she now is on Substack, and she has her own podcast called Honestly. And I heard an interview with her with a doctor, and I wanted to share some of the questions that she was asking him. I also saw this doctor on Joe Rogan, not knowing it was the same person. And the doctor that I'm referring to is Dr. Marty Makary. Dr. Marty Mccairy is a surgical oncologist and chief of the Johns Hopkins Islet Transplant Center. He is a clinical lead for the Johns Hopkins Sibley Innovation Hub and serves as an executive director of Improving Wisely, a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation project to lower healthcare costs in the United States by creating measures of appropriateness in healthcare. Dr. Macary's research focuses on the creation and evaluation of new healthcare innovations. He's the creator of the Surgery Checklist, publishing its first description, and later served on the World Health Organization Safe Surgery Saves Lives Committee. He led the WSHO work group to create global measures of surgical quality. Dr. Makary has published over 250 scientific articles, including the first description of frailty impacting surgical outcomes, and original studies on safety culture, measurements in hospitals, and an evaluation on the Orphan Drug Act. He's a leading voice for physicians, writing in the Wall Street Journal, and is the author of the New York Times best-selling book Unaccountable, about patient safety and physician-led transparency efforts in healthcare. He's the founder of the Johns Hopkins Center for Surgical Outcomes Research and Clinical Trials, and is the recipient of numerous grants to evaluate the effectiveness of surgical technology in new interventions in healthcare. He serves as a professor of surgery at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, where he has pioneered new pancreas operations at Johns Hopkins, including the laparoscopic Whipple procedure. He performed the first series of laparoscopic islet auto transplantation and other laparoscopic operations in the field of surgery. Dr. Makary is among the few highest volume laparoscopic pancreas surgeons in the United States. He's the recipient of the National Pancreas Foundation's Nobility in Science Award. He's a graduate of Bucknell, Thomas Jefferson, and Harvard University, and he completed his surgical training at Georgetown University and his fellowship at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He's also a member of the National Academy of Medicine, and his most recent book of what he is the author of is The Price We Pay: What Broke American Healthcare and How to Fix It. So I want to go through some of the questions. So hat tip to Bari Weiss and the Honestly podcast, because that's where all of these answers are going to come from. And so what I'm going to do is, if you're watching live right now, you can actually see Dr. Marty on the screen right now. And if you're not watching, you'll be able to hear his answers to some of these questions. So I want to fly through these, and they've been edited hopefully to save time, and hopefully you get a little bit out of this. So the first thing that, if I were interviewing Dr. Marty, I would just ask him, is COVID over?
Is where we're going to have to just learn to live with it. That official transition is probably going to be when we get these new therapeutics as soon as a couple weeks from now. They're pretty remarkable, cut COVID deaths to 0. But to answer your question about Thanksgiving, the only Thanksgiving I would approve of is if it's at the International Space Station after people have 10 boosters and are tested every hour.
Now, clearly, that's a joke, and he was joking. You're going to hear him. He's going to reference that joke a little bit later, because he's not one of these that thinks that we need to be locked down, as hopefully you haven't been. Hopefully you had a great day today. You brought family members over, including family members who are a little bit older. So hopefully you did that. As far as masking goes, the next question that Bari asked Dr. Marty was, if we're supposed to still be wearing masks at all, when and where should we actually still be wearing those masks?
So something we've never really done with COVID from the beginning right up until now is really figure out the risk stratification. That is, who is really affected by COVID. We've never had good data on that. Early on in the spring of the outbreak in New York, we couldn't find it. We begged everyone, the New York Health Authority, the CDC, no one was collecting it. And so it took us a long time to realize that it's very hard for this virus to hurt somebody young and healthy. And that the people who are dying, and there are people dying today in high numbers, the vast majority are adults with a comorbid condition, particularly older, who do not have vaccinated immunity and have not had COVID in the past. That is a very surgically precise group, and those are the people at risk right now. And I don't think it's fair to hold the entire society hostage because they've made a personal choice, which is not a wise choice in my opinion, to put themselves at risk.
So this is a very common opinion. This is not controversial. With the data that we have now, and with how we've seen what COVID affects and who it affects. We understand how it gets transferred. Even the Delta variant or any variant that we see in the future, we sort of understand that there is a certain group of our society that is at much greater risk than anyone else. And we're never going to get to a place where there's no risk. We don't operate like that in any other aspect of life. But you probably know people who go in for medical procedures like I do. And I know someone who recently went in for a medical procedure, and they were told to put on a mask underneath the oxygen mask right before they went into surgery. So they had to have the surgical mask on their face, and then they put the oxygen mask over the top of that mask. And this person sort of explained that it felt kind of performative. I'd like to know if Dr. Marty has an opinion about what is actually going on there.
It's the same logic that says you must wear a mask in a restaurant for the 9 steps until you get to your table, and then you can take off the mask for 2 hours and yap and yell. And we have 2 pandemics. We had the COVID-19 pandemic, and now we have an accompanying second pandemic, which is a pandemic of lunacy. And it has to do with the survey that shows that the public perception among a large fraction of the United States believes that the risk of hospitalization with COVID is over 50%. A large segment of the population believes that. And guess what? We got a small group of people making all the decisions on COVID policy, and their risk tolerance is going to be different from my risk tolerance and that of an everyday American.
So let's talk a little bit about risk, because I think that we didn't do a good job, and I think Dr. Marty will agree with this. We didn't do a good job in risk assessment and looking at the math and figuring out what's going to be the fallout. We've talked about that, but let's talk a little bit about risk here for a second. What is the actual risk of ending up in the hospital with COVID?
You know, I love it that you're asking this. No one is asking this question. We've got to quantify the risk and present the data to people. We have such a paternal attitude right now in public health. By the way, there's a long history of this in public health. We wouldn't allow women to have home pregnancy tests because they couldn't interpret the meaning and significance of a positive result. It had to be done with a doctor, particularly a male doctor. HIV tests. For 10 years, many of us were saying, let's get home HIV testing, and the old guard medical establishment, same people that are, in charge right now, argued, no, this needs to be done in a doctor's office. Well, here we are with COVID, and we have this paternalistic approach. Let's quantify the risk. If you're fully vaccinated, all Americans, the risk of being hospitalized is 1 in 20,000 on a weekly basis. When COVID levels are high, when they're low, it's much lower, and that's heavily skewed. The 1 in 20,000, that one person is older, overweight. I know we can't talk about that. We're not allowed to. It's not politically correct. But obese, those are the people that get into trouble.
You see, you notice that you're not able to talk about health in general. I mean, what an opportunity we missed when COVID hit and we started to understand that this was affecting people primarily with comorbidities, primarily with obesity and the challenges that went along with obesity. I mean, look, when I understood this was the game plan for me. To lose weight. I knew that I was morbidly obese. I had to get healthy. I have lost almost 100 pounds in the last little over 3 months, and that's not to pat myself on the back or to toot my own horn. I just looked at the data, and the data showed that if you are not healthy, especially, I'm not necessarily old, I'm under 50, but my COVID age was much higher than my actual age, because I was so unhealthy, because I was so overweight. And so this is for everyone out there. If you don't want to get the vaccine, but you have multiple comorbidities, you are not healthy, you are old and unhealthy, you may want to rethink about that, because everything is safe. But as you heard, if you're fully vaccinated, he said that you have basically a 1 in 20,000 chance of being hospitalized. Listen to that again.
So look, let me tell you, first of all, that we probably recommended the wrong mask. We said any mask, and most people are wearing a cloth mask with their nose hanging out like a bee, and that's what? Almost zero. Zero. The high risk, immunosuppressed, and the young healthy. So,
all right, let's try that again.
Per week, and that's all people older, high risk, immunosuppressed, and the young healthy. So the young healthy folks, it's almost 1 in infinitesimally small. And the 80-year-old with immunosuppression, that's the person who shows up. So no state will tell us who is showing up in the hospital of the fully vaccinated, okay? Except for one, North Dakota. They've made transparent their data, and here's what it shows. And I just spent a lot of time with the North Dakota Public Health Department. Here's what it is. The average age of a fully vaccinated person going to the hospital, that is a breakthrough hospitalization, is 73. The average age of a breakthrough death is 80. So what's that tell you?
What that tells me is that if you are fully vaccinated, unless you're already at a significant age and significant comorbidities, meaning you're unhealthy, that the vaccine will probably help you, but you need all the help that you can get. But it's telling you that the vaccine is, one, effective, and it's also helping it's helping on top of the young, basically healthy example of people who are not going into the hospitals. Okay, so I want to get back to the masking for a second, because if the masks, if the masks we know are not really that helpful, then I mean, is there really any benefit at all, according to Dr. Marty, in masking up?
So look, let me tell you, first of all, that we probably recommended the wrong mask. We said any mask, and most people are wearing a cloth mask with their nose hanging out like a beaker. Guess what? Almost zero impact. That's most schools in America. That's 52 million kids we've subjected to covering their faces. The cluster randomized control trial done by Stanford in Bangladesh found absolutely no significant signal in the data of a cloth mask. That was a large cluster randomized control trial. Surgical masks did help. It reduced transmission by 11% and KN95 by more. And if you wear a surgical astronaut spacesuit, it'll reduce it to almost zero. The question is, are we going to look at these other consequences of losing the human connection? Because they're real. Substance abuse deaths up 20 to 30%. Opioid deaths, the number just came out. It's up by about 20,000, 100,000 people last year. Deferred cancer care, we see that in the hospital all the time. People are miserable, depressed. What are we doing? You can wear an astronaut suit every day for the rest of your life, and it will reduce the risk of influenza, of Coxsackie virus, of the 4 common cold viruses that are coronavirus subtypes and have been around for decades. The question is, at what point do you let people ride a bike and drive a car and participate in sports and go on a golf course? Because there is a risk that a golf ball can hit you or lightning could strike, but at some point we're robbing people of their livelihoods. And where I come down on this is let them make the choice, not us in public health.
So that's, for many of you, you should love that answer. Public health officials and politicians, according to Dr. Marty, should be allowing people to make the decisions for themselves. So if you're a fully vaccinated person who is not at high risk because you lack the comorbidities that you've outlined, age, weight, and so on, is it okay to take off the mask?
I don't wear a mask in public or with friends unless I'm in a bingo night at the local geriatric gathering where there's a lot of people that have organ transplants. I'll do it. I'll wear a mask out of courtesy. But look at the farce of what's happening. Not only do you have to wear a mask for the 9 steps to walk to your table at a restaurant, but when you go to a gathering, the workers are wearing a mask and no one else is wearing a mask. Look at what we're doing to poor communities in the United States. We're imposing a new form of an oligarchy that is, it's exercising a power imbalance that would in any other setting would be seen as disgusting. Just open your eyes and look and see who is wearing a mask. These are people from minority communities, low income, poor people who are working. They have to work during the pandemic. And those of us that are enjoying cocktails, we're told, for you are dignified enough, you are noble enough where your transmission is somehow sanctioned. It's okay. And for other people, it's not. We have seen social inequality magnified during this pandemic through an oligarchy that has been telling this other group in the United States, let them eat cake. And we saw it, for example, last year. We had a very healthy conversation in the United States about racial equality in the wake of George Floyd. Fast forward just a couple months down the road, and the vaccine comes out, and guess what? People with power and influence insert themselves in the vaccine line. Board members, private jets flying to Florida because they could get it there instead of New York. Board members of medical centers, 22-year-old estheticians in a dermatology clinic, basically saying in a societal way, our life matters more than those who are vulnerable and at risk. And then we have school closures, which if you live in the Hamptons and have a private tutor and a $10,000 Zoom suite for your kids, yeah, it's not that bad to keep the schools closed. Come to East Baltimore. These kids are barely hanging in school without COVID. You're going to give them an iPad and tell them we're going to do school remotely? It's a complete disconnect in society. And like the root of many problems, it stems from a lack of proximity to the problem.
So I want to go to the chat room at WSHO.com and get some of your comments on what you're hearing so far from Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. And Westbank says, Happy Thanksgiving. I will be celebrating unvaxxed and unmasked with friends and family from friend. Good, Westbank. I'm glad. I think that's a good thing. Rob FLA says, thanks, SG, with you. This from President Trump. Enjoy your Thanksgiving knowing that a wonderful future lies ahead. Donald Trump, Thanksgiving Day 2021. Joseph says vaccine shots are good. Domestic oil and gas is good. Drill, drill, drill. Seat belts and life preservers save lives. Michael says Fauci now wants to change the definition of fully vaccinated. When people wake up to this scam, they are ruling. They are ruling we will get our freedom back. Seven said, keeping doing what Fauci, Old Man Joe, and maybe this chap also, and you will have no freedom left. Just keep listening, Seven, because this guy isn't a fan of Fauci or Old Man Joe. Michael said exactly, we won't get freedom back until we take it back. Joe said, by and large, if you die of COVID-19, you will finally be free of your stupidity of not getting a vaccine shot. SG, it's not a vaccine, so stop calling it so. It is a vaccine, SG. There's no other term to call it. It is a vaccine. It's not, some of them are not like the old vaccines, but it's still definitely a vaccine. All right, so let's get back into this. And by the way, that's comments from the chat room at WSHO.com. And I want to get to the next question here, and that is still staying with the idea of masks. We talked about basically that if you're vaccinated and or have no comorbidities, you really don't need to wear a mask unless you're around a bunch of really old people and who have a bunch of comorbidities. So let's switch that to the kids. What about the kids? Should they be wearing masks, especially kids that are actually in school?
So I don't think masks is a binary thing. It's not mask or don't mask. It's universal masking versus selective masking, and we should use selective masking in perpetuity. That is, if you have symptoms or if you're high risk or you want to, go ahead and wear a mask. If you use universal masking as a heavy hand beyond its utility, you alienate the authority of public health and you discredit the ability of those of us in medicine to say, hey, we need you to run because there's a fire in the future. You can only cry wolf so many times, and we have to remove restrictions as aggressively as we put them on, or else we lose credibility altogether. Now, do the masks work? Again, cloth masks barely work, probably not at all. The cluster randomized trial was in adults, and we know kids are less efficient transmitters. So we're fooling ourselves. Also, kids with learning disabilities are now showing up to speech pathologists because they can't speak well, because they're not visualizing the phonation of words. We're hearing guidance counselors talk about an influx of kids with all kinds of disconnect problems. Some kids do very well with masks. You know, they wear them for 6-8 hours and then they come home, they take them off and they're with a loving family. But that's not all of America. We've got to remember, half of America has less than $400 of cash on hand. Life is a struggle. They live paycheck to paycheck, and they may not be able to provide, a great, wonderful environment for their kid when they come back home from school. School is their livelihood. So shutting them out is, in my opinion, having significant implications, and the mask wearing is we're losing that human connection. If there's an active outbreak, sure, maybe a surgical mask makes sense during an active outbreak or something high quality. But what we're doing now is using an indiscriminate mask policy at times when it may not even be working, and we don't have any data that it's working.
So no data that it's working, and yet there are stories, and I know you're familiar with them because I'm familiar with them, and it's these stories that even like parents who send their kids to school, their kids are outside to have someone come in and read, not even one of these LGBTQ things, just a person comes in and reads story time outside, and the person that's reading the story to the kids has to wear a mask on outside. And so there's a lot of parents who are upset by this because their children are being forced to wear masks outside. The person who's fully vaccinated and going to read to their kids has to put a mask on outside. And so should these parents be as upset as they are?
People have lost their minds because no one would ever act like this when there was influenza circulating in the community, ever, even though the case fatality rate is comparable. They would never act like this with Coxsackie virus. Do you know there were as many kids with RSV in the hospital this year as there were with COVID? Didn't get any attention. It's not, getting headlines. They don't give a rip that 400,000 kids died of malaria the year before COVID. Where's the outrage? It's such selective outrage. Now, if masks work, and we have zero data on masks in kids. If they work, they would rank as number 6 in mitigation strategies, yet the entire culture wars are around masking kids. The number one factor that drives childhood transmission is adult immunity rates, followed by distancing, hygiene, good ventilation in the classroom, whether or not the kids are potting together. So people have focused so intensely on the masks in kids. But again, let's be honest, there's a power imbalance going on, right? right? Schools were closed when bowling alleys were open. You look at the reopening plan back when we were planning to reopen last spring before Delta threw out of whack the herd immunity calculations. The absolute last group to reopen was going to be schools. Absolute last in line. Why? Because kids don't vote. So let's be honest about the power imbalance here.
Yeah, it's all about power. That's what we've known about. It feels like during the Trump administration, there was an attempt on the part of the Trump administration to try and get something that made living inside the United States as normal as possible and to shorten the pandemic as much as possible. But when you have the likes of teachers unions and school board associations, the Democrat Party, Joe Biden, progressive politicians that want to control every aspect of our lives, this feels like it became a very convenient way to control the population. So I guess the next logical question is what is it going to take? What ultimately has to happen in order for the era of masking to end?
Well, I think that people are dying for a human connection, and if you look at the oligarchy of the United States, they're already taking off their masks. When they get together, their masks are off. The question is there going to be an uprising, or is there going to be some sort of stand that the masses are going to take where they see the hypocrisy here and they just don't want to live with their face covered? I mean, think of people that work in a hot environment. Think of, an engineer that's working on a physical plant. The masks are getting really old, especially when they're outdoors and we have these they see the absurdity of it. So I had always interpreted the Glenn Youngkin election in part to be a vote for some form of more reasonable approach to restrictions and mandates.
Yeah, there's the pushback. I think as Americans, we're looking for common sense. Like we're just not interested in people telling us what to do. Give us the facts and we will make the necessary decisions for ourselves. Don't make mandates. Don't force people to do things. When you begin to do that, you make people suspicious of your motives, and you're not in a place where your motives are beyond reproach, where they're not beyond, we don't trust you. We've seen the things that you've done in the past, and we don't trust you to tell us what to do now or in the future. So take a look at this. The FDA has just recently approved the Pfizer vaccine for emergency use in kids as young as 5. So I guess what I'd like to know is, should kids as young as 5 get the vaccine?
Okay, I'm going to be very honest with you. And by the way, a lot of pediatricians have shared this sentiment with me, and they're afraid to say it publicly. It's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. It's not a binary categorization that you're either pro-child vaccinations or anti-vaccinations. I don't think kids should be getting the anthrax vaccine. That doesn't make me an anti-vaxxer. The risk-benefit analysis is unique, and it changes by whether or not the kids had COVID. If they had COVID, there's no scientific evidence for a medical argument that they are required or would benefit from the vaccine. The data does not exist. Matter of fact, in that trial of kids 5 through 11 that was used to authorize Pfizer's vaccine for that group, no one in the trial was hospitalized or got severe illness, not in the vaccine arm or in the placebo arm, okay? If the kid had COVID, which is half of kids in that age group, they don't need a vaccine. They can get one dose, and some pediatricians may recommend that. We can't use the term have to. It's dishonest. If the kid has a comorbidity, we think that's the composition of the 94 kids who have died of COVID in that age group out of 28 million. Kids with comorbidities, I would recommend it.
So almost to the identical extreme of the significantly elderly or the older population with comorbidities. We've only had 94 kids this entire time within this age group that have died, and all 94 had significant comorbidities. And yet we see schools that are going out there and they're forcing kids to get vaccinated, to get fully vaccinated, or they're not going to allow them to actually go to school. So is this a reasonable policy for schools to be forcing kids to get vaccinated or you're not able to attend school?
It's almost like the government is the arsenic and the firefighter. They've created the problem that they are there to solve with their own vaccine solution. You know, they're the boogeyman and the savior. So they're creating this art manufactured problem or a barrier to going to school if you're unvaccinated. And then we have the solution for you right here. So if that's a political argument to say, should I get it just to get them in school? It's not a medical argument. If they do universal vaccine requirements, they will hurt kids that do not benefit from the vaccine. There will be unintended harm. Let me be very clear, because the rate of myocarditis in adolescence was 1 in 7,000 boys. Doesn't sound very pretty. We're talking about heart inflammation. Now, in the group of kids, when I say kids, it's really up to age 22. In the group of folks 15 to 22, one of those out of 100 plus died, okay? You talk about an indiscriminate vaccine policy for 72 million kids in America. And by the way, Israel they had a 22-year-old death clearly from the vaccine published in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's the death that we know of, probably a couple more out there. Israel is 1/38th the size of the United States. Are we prepared to extrapolate their deaths to our population of young people? I don't think so. So these indiscriminate vaccine policies in people already immune especially will result in unintended harm. And I think parents are right to oppose them. Only 27% of parents in surveys say they are eager to vaccinate their 5 through 11-year-old, and that's for some good reasons, I think.
So parents, you need to become very aware of these kind of numbers that Dr. Marty is talking about. You need to be able to articulate this at your school board meetings, at your PTA meetings, if you go to private schools, wherever it is. You need to be able to articulate this if your school is forcing your child to get a vaccination and you don't really want your child to get the vaccination. And so, you know, there's a lot of questions as to, some of you are probably old enough to remember that your parents allowed you, when chickenpox was going around, they allowed you to get chickenpox so that you had natural immunity. So it kind of begs the question as to whether or not we should just allow these kids, instead of giving them a vaccine that we don't really know much or have enough data to be able to have proper risk analysis on whether getting COVID at that young age is as risky, less risky, or more risky than a vaccine that we just simply don't know about, or should we let some herd immunity and let kids get COVID in that age group like we used to do in some cases for chickenpox?
I don't think that's a good idea, but remember the risks of both are exceedingly low. The risk of the vaccine in kids and the risk of COVID in kids. Now remember, the 94 kids who have died to date, and that includes when we were doing a terrible job treating it, and back when the infection rates were much higher, they probably, nearly all of them had a comorbidity. So if a kid has a comorbidity, it's a different risk profile, and I'd say get the vaccine. If the kid is healthy, you're talking about a very close call in terms of risk-benefit of getting the vaccine. So I think everyone's going to have a different risk tolerance as a parent, and they should have that conversation. If they had the infection in the past, to me, there's no scientific argument.
All right, so let's move on from kids. I think it's pretty clear with the kids. We understand the risk benefit of either getting a vaccine or letting them get COVID, or if they get COVID, we understand the risk behind that. If your child has comorbidities, talk to your pediatrician. I think that's sort of the simplest place to make a decision for all of these things. But you're going to have to get some information under your belt so that you can talk intelligently, soberly, but forcefully to those who wish to skew the data or use speculation instead of science. So let's move on from the children and let's talk about the vaccine mandates in adults. Dr. Marty, vaccine mandates for adults. Yay or nay?
We don't do mandates well when we do them as a society. I don't have a problem with hospitals saying if you're going to interface with the vulnerable, that we need to require that you're immune. And we've done that with influenza year to year. But these nurses that are saying, I already got COVID, I jumped on the grenade when COVID hit this country, I sacrificed my life, we didn't know what the case fatality rate was, I've got circulating antibodies. Why are we not accepting those circulating antibodies? They're circulating antibodies that are effective against COVID, but they're antibodies that have not been approved by Dr. Fauci. That is absurd. You've got antibodies that work, but they're not approved by the government. I mean, the complete insanity that we're going to require you to be immunized against a virus for which you're already immune to. I mean, if you go on the CDC's website and look at their guidance on the varicella chickenpox vaccine, it says, we do not recommend the chickenpox vaccine if you have had chickenpox because you have long-term immunity. Again, this is a highly stigmatized political virus where we got a mandate from on high that said vaccinate every human being with 2 feet, regardless if they're ultra extreme low risk, like Olympic athletes or professional athletes. I don't know any professional athlete that's ever died of COVID anywhere in the world. And I've been saying that for a while now, and somebody sent me, they think they found one, an amateur weightlifting athlete in Pakistan. So we get these very low risk people to say you have to. How about we quantify the risk to them? The lunacy, and the media just falls for this government line that natural immunity doesn't work. They have not seen something they love this much since weapons of mass destruction coming out of the government.
All right, so let's go back into the chat room at WSHO.com. If you go over there, there's some folks online. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you who are in there. So thankful that we're almost done with COVID. I think it's all something that we can definitely be thankful for. In the chat room at WSHO.com, let's see, SG said, sure, if you decide to jump from a bridge, don't force anyone else to jump with you. That's your decision. No, absolutely. Listen, two things can be true at the same time, SG. I can be for the vaccine, and I can also be for your right to not take the vaccine. See how that works? You can do two things at the same time. Joseph said, you fight fire with water, not fire. You fight COVID-19 with wearing masks and taking your shots that block the virus that can cause bodily harm. Well, no. We know that taking the shot doesn't prevent getting it, spreading it, or developing COVID-19 if you are infected with the coronavirus. What the shots do is help you to cut your chances of being in the hospital. If you're fully vaccinated and you'd have basically no comorbidities, you have a 1 in 20,000 chance of being hospitalized. And if you're hospitalized, you're 50-50, you're going to die. So if we can cut hospitalization, we can also cut death. That's what the shots are for, not block the virus that can do the harm. And the masks basically don't work. The cloths have no work, Joseph. They don't work at all, Joseph. And the surgical masks only give you about 10% protection from anything else because this is aerosol. The only way you can really do it is to wear an N95, and that's if it fits your face and you wear it, and not the one that has the respirator in it. SG, let's look at that. If you have the shot, can still be infected, can become a super spreader, not even knowing it, still need a mask, will need many boosters in the future, many as short as every 90 days. They said get a shot to protect others, which turns out to be false. So where is the benefit? Again, must have missed it. Well, SG, I think I fixed that. So good job as well. We were both on top of that one. Jim said, yes, all is all based in falsehoods. No, some of it is, okay, so Jim, some of it is a poor job of explaining it. Some of it probably is a little bit malicious. A lot of it is based on power. But it's not all based on falsehoods. I've always said everything that I've said, not on falsehoods, but on the facts of what's always been consistent. Coronavirus is the virus that will infect you, and if you have no natural immunity or vaccinated immunity, your coronavirus will create COVID-19. If you are older than 55 and have an average of 3.5 comorbidities, like the 95% of people that died, COVID-19 is going to kick your butt. If you are younger than 55 and you are relatively healthy, with no comorbidities, no natural immunity, and no vaccinated immunity, you will probably, more than likely, kick it pretty good, and then you have natural immunity. If you are either older or younger than 55 and you get the vaccine, you have a infinitesimally small chance of being hospitalized, and if you're not hospitalized, you have no chance of dying. That is the facts. Joseph, America needs to fear God, not vaccine shots. I agree, Joseph. The message of the true prophet is to repent and change your life around and get right with God Almighty Jesus Christ. Well, sort of, Joseph. I mean, I agree with you that we need not to fear vaccine shots, and we know that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, so I agree with you there. West Bank said, isn't what they claim, so why believe them down? No, that's not true, West Bank. If you have gotten your information soberly and in good locations, if you're getting your information from the mainstream media, yes, it sounds like they said one thing in the beginning and they said another thing now. Also, listen, just because they said one thing and then they changed their mind doesn't mean that they were lying. My pediatrician, who I love, Dr. Dice, Dr. Teresa Dice, I love her, and I asked her that same question. She said, listen, this is the novel coronavirus. This was something that we didn't know about. So as information and data became available, they made new decisions. This is a good thing. This is how science works. We get some data in, we analyze it, we compare it to what we said, and then if we need to, we make a change, we make a decision. So they said one thing and then they said other things. That's not a bad thing. So you need to understand how to believe them, not necessarily why we should or shouldn't believe them, because they're not always just simply lying to us. That's an oversimplification on your part, West Bank. All right, let's go back to Dr. Marty and let's ask him some more questions. There are businesses, Dr. Marty, that are suing the Biden administration. And I'm wondering if the suits against the mandate by businesses, if any of these cases have a shot at winning. In terms of businesses winning, are there any that may have a chance?
I think they do have a good case, and it's tragic it came to this because we were doing a good job encouraging people to get vaccinated. I was talking to people who were very hesitant and unvaccinated. They were at risk, that is, they were adults with a comorbidity, and I would strongly encourage, I would take time out of my schedule to have so many conversations with individuals because these are people who are sitting ducks as Delta was surging. We were making progress, and then this government mandate came about, and people saw the excessive reach of government and being told what to do against their volition, and they hardened and dug into their positions. Now they will never get vaccinated, and now we're stuck. And guess what? If the vaccines wear off in 6 months or a year, as they look like they're doing in older people, we might need to get them a booster. Good luck. They're not going to do it. We have hardened them so much. So we made a terrible mistake. All of these problems we're dealing with, including low staffing rates in hospitals, as many as 1 in 5 people in healthcare have left in the last 2 years. They're leaving in droves, and they're about to leave in another mass exodus with the next dates that come around unless this court keeps the stay on. And so the supply chain crises that are affecting medications coming to the U.S., food, all of these problems were all avoidable. TSA age screeners were not fully vaccinated as of just a few weeks ago. And that deadline is coming. What's going to happen? Are we going to freeze up as a country? 22 fire stations in New York have closed. Police officers all over the place are leaving with crime surging in Baltimore and other. We have lost our sense of the forest from the trees here. It is so aggravating to see what is going on right now. These mandates froze everybody in their position when we were making progress. All of these problems were avoidable with a little bit of flexibility with the policy. We would have been in a much better place in public health.
And I also think that if President Trump would have been reelected and inaugurated as the next president of the United States, and his administration was continuing to handle the rollout of the vaccine, I think many of you who push against, first of all, there'd be no mandate, but I think that the Trump administration, the fact that it got the vaccines to us, you'd look at it as a modern medical miracle. You'd be thankful today that we have this, and that a year after the vaccines have been rolled out, that we are pretty much at the end of the pandemic version of COVID-19. But you heard Dr. Marty there reference the oligarchy on several of his answers, and I'm wondering if he could maybe unpack that a little bit and explain to us, like, who are the oligarchy that he's referring to, and to what extent has the COVID policy that they've more or less put out there fueled the rage toward this group known as the oligarchy?
Well, there's a very small group of non-age diverse, non-ethnically diverse individuals making all the decisions on COVID. And we've always had different opinions in medicine, and we'd have an open and honest civil dialogue until now. Now, doctors from around the country are routinely reaching out to me saying, thank you for saying something. I tried to say something at my hospital and they threatened me. I said something on the local radio station. The communications department gave me a hard time. All of these doctors now are suppressed. I have doctors in California who are so scared because California is some of the most extreme excessive policies. They're basically saying, I totally agree with you, Marty. Keep talking about natural immunity. I can't say anything here. I will get destroyed. I mean, they basically made it clear, some medical boards now, that if you even talk about things with randomized controlled trial data, they're going to potentially evaluate that to do a licensure action. I mean, right now it's McCarthyism. If you support a lot of the things that are very reasonable, there's a modern day witch hunt. It's not healthy for science. So this oligarchy has chosen to do a lot of things wrong. Now, I like Dr. Fauci. He's a nice man. I've disagreed with him on almost every aspect of the pandemic, warning of the pandemic, the initial recommendation on masks, the lab leak, the surface transmission argument he was putting out, the lack of really any NIH funding to answer basic questions early on, creating a vacuum that political opinions filled, not disclosing data on comorbidity, school closures, the FDA moving too slow, vaccine allocation, spacing the doses, natural immunity. Beyond that, I agree with everything he's done.
So that's a lot to disagree with, but I'm curious to know from Dr. Marty, what is in it? What's in it for the oligarchy?
Well, I think they got a taste of what it's like to be king, and they don't want to turn the keys back over. I do think they are well intended. I do believe they love this country and want the best for people. I just think that they've recognized that they don't need to listen to these other outside opinions. And as you may have heard in this recent book that just came out, there was sort of a pact internally that a bunch of the folks making decisions on the initial COVID committee, the work group formed by the White House last year, they basically decided we're going to stay in sync. We're going to stay on message. That's not good. That's not how science is done. Science is an evolving discipline based on incoming data and different opinions that are heard and then debated. So we haven't had that, and I think that's been our problem. They are very like-minded, and by the way, they've got their biases. When HIV hit this country, Dr. Fauci immediately started talking incessantly about a vaccine that would bail us out of the HIV epidemic. Guess what? We never got a vaccine. It was therapeutics, and it wasn't one, it was a cocktail, and that allowed us to manage this infection. Same thing here, an intense focus on vaccines, which we needed. We needed to work on vaccines. But do you know there are so many therapeutics now, aside from the controversial ones of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which I personally do not believe have any activity against the virus based on the data that's out there. That's my review of that literature. Fluvoxamine, which is Prozac, reduced hospitalizations by 91%. A German study just came out, found that almost no one died with a high level of vitamin D in a meta-analysis. Hypertonic saline, a nasal spray of saline you can buy for $4 over the counter, and could the entire pandemic reduce your hospitalization risk from 10% down to 1.2%, an 8-fold reduction. Steroid nebulizers actively included in standard of care for COVID in the UK, not even acknowledged here. In any other industry, if you're this wrong, you would no longer hold your job. It's sad. When I read the studies, you're like, oh my God, this has been around. Even Pfizer's new drug, the pill, the oral pill, a 5-day pill, cut COVID deaths to 0. One of the main components is ritonavir. That's been around for decades. Ritonavir has been around. Why weren't we doing those trials last year? The NIH last year, we just did this study at Johns Hopkins, spent 5% of its budget last year on COVID research. They spent twice as much money last year on aging research than they did on COVID research. $42 billion at the NIH. The country, the world needed the NIH to quickly do the trials in a matter of weeks. And they insisted on funding their research on Mexican hairless dogs and whatever other stuff is going on in the lab. That's a real animal model used in science, by the way. And they would not pivot the money. The average time for them to give money for COVID, for the 5% of their money they spent on COVID research, it took them 5 months. And guess what? They created a massive vacuum. when the world was asking the most reasonable questions. How does it spread? Do masks work? When are you most contagious? How long do I need to quarantine for? We had no answers. We had no data. The entire medical establishment sat there with no answers to these questions. And guess what filled that vacuum? Political opinions. Look at what we've done to doctors. We put them on this singular mission to do everything humanly possible to block viral replication and transmission at any cost. And guess what? When people say, hey, if I play track and field and I do the pole vault, which people compete one person at a time, could I get COVID? And they think of some theoretical construct where one aerosolized virus could, and they would say yes. Okay, we put them on this crazy mission because we stopped talking about the whole person and we completely ignored the fact that the reason we have one of the highest death rates per capita in the world is we have one of the most obese populations in the world. We've ignored comorbidity and data. That's how I think we got into this problem.
There you go again. There you go again. So even anecdotally, you've heard the stories about doctors who are scared to tell their patients not to get a booster because they're pressured by different organizations that they're a part of and hospitals and whatnot, that even just the pressure along their peers to push getting more shots. And even if it's just anecdotal, I'm wondering if Dr. Marty has heard some of these stories, being a leader and an advocate for other doctors in his field.
Extremely common. Doctors have a tough time speaking their honest beliefs because of this anti-vax label that can come around. And we've even seen it with, say, natural immunity. That threatens the message that we need to vaccinate every human being with 2 feet. And then if you talk about it, you're seen as, hey, how dare you do that? People might go out there and choose to get natural immunity, that is, choose to get the infection instead of choosing to get vaccinated. And we cannot allow that to happen. You're saying we can't be honest with people? We can both be honest about natural immunity and its effectiveness and encourage people to get vaccinated at the same time. But I've never seen this level of incredible skewed paternalism in medicine like we see now. And I will talk to doctors who are supposed experts. And that term is a very loose term because it's usually a term crowned by the media, okay? But I will talk to infectious diseases doctors. They haven't read the studies. It's easier to go along with the sort of the group think. The American Academy of Pediatrics is so heavily political now, it's out of control. The FDA in the kids 5 through 11 trial wanted more kids studied. They didn't feel comfortable with only 1,500 kids getting the vaccine and us making sweeping recommendations for the 28 million kids in that age group. They wanted an additional 1,000 kids. Not a big ask, especially when the myocarditis happens in 1 in 7,000 adolescent boys. And so they asked for another 1,000 patients to be enrolled, and the American Academy of Pediatrics publicly and vigorously came out in opposition of the FDA wanting to see some more data on patients. And then it was, you know what, if you don't agree, then you're opposing the American Academy of Pediatrics. That's the expert, the consensus. And then the media just go to their go-to people. And so they have latched on to a small group of people that are generally, and I'm going to say this as a nonpartisan, I am politically independent as they get. I don't let a political party tell me how to think. I think for myself. But invariably, 99% of the so-called experts are Democrat political appointees. You cannot have political allegiances if you're going to be honest. And the media has latched on to this message from Fauci on high down that natural immunity is unreliable. They've latched right onto it. You can't trust it. There's a commercial I just saw. Will natural immunity protect you against COVID? True or false? False. All these fact checkers. It's complete lunacy because the government, it protects you better than vaccinated immunity. It's not perfect. But where are the cases of those who had COVID in the past and recovered and now come back and they're intubated in the ICU or died? Where are those patients? They're exceptionally rare. And when they occur, they're in immunosuppressed or patients with unique medical conditions. So we're almost 2 years into this. We don't see people getting into trouble after previously recovering from COVID. Natural immunity works for other diseases. It works for the other hot coronaviruses of SARS and MERS. There's only 3 coronaviruses that cause severe illness. With both of those, they've been studied long-term. The natural immunity is effective and durable. 16 studies show that. In the largest study worldwide, in the Israeli study, it was 27 times more effective than vaccinated immunity. But the only 2 studies to the contrary are from the CDC. They were sham, jerry-rigged studies that were so embarrassing they would not get accepted in the journal of, it would get disqualified in a 7th grade science fair project. That's how horrible these studies were.
Okay, well then, I mean that begs the next question then, Dr. Marty. Do you then, in fact, trust the CDC?
I sometimes think we would have done better in the pandemic if we didn't have a CDC, because the CDC has consistently put out unreliable recommendations, and we can't have a group of disconnected people adjudicating on every aspect of American life. And when they try to do it, they get it wrong a lot. When they shut out kids from school for over a year, I was very upset with the CDC. I remember the original sin of the entire U.S. COVID response was the CDC blocked any lab from doing COVID testing. Testing is the absolute foundation of dealing with any pandemic. And so they told the country, they told the White House, we don't have evidence of community transmission. They were using these terrible sampling systems that were non-representative. I mean, think about it. You're a lab tech at a large university in the lab, and it's quiet because with the COVID pandemic exploding, no one's coming to the hospital. So now you have a lot of time. There's not much going on. You're looking at a shiny, beautiful, new PCR machine that can tell you if somebody has COVID in 20 minutes, and you're not allowed to run the tests because the CDC for months basically said you can't do it. That was the original sin of the pandemic.
All right, so back to the pregnant woman. If there's a pregnant woman out there and her doctor is recommending that she get the booster, very simple and straightforward question: should a pregnant woman get a booster?
No, during pregnancy, no. I would not recommend it. I would not recommend it. Now, technically shouldn't be giving medical advice, so I'm going to say if I were pregnant and had been fully vaccinated, I would not get the booster in pregnancy. Some women are reporting menstrual irregularities with the vaccine. We can't blow that off. So when people say, hey, I've got menstrual irregularity, there's something going on. There's something hormonal involving the inflammation. There may be cross-reactivity of the antibodies. I would say, what are we trying to save you from if you're already fully vaccinated? And if you're pregnant, you're going to be younger, and assume that friend is healthy. It doesn't make sense. There's a bandwagon right now, and it's this train to get every single human being a booster, even though the FDA and CDC's own technical experts voted down boosters for everybody just a matter of weeks ago. Now the FDA is re-bringing up the issue, and they're going to decide on it, and they've chosen to not convene their external experts in making the decision on the second round. Why? They don't want to hear what they have to say. I mean, let's call a spade, and that is academically dishonest.
That kind of dishonesty is what makes you and I not trust these people from on high when they tell us to do things. So today is Thanksgiving, and we have family members, as we even read in our own chat room here at WSHO.com. We read that they're getting together in mixed vaccination and unmasked gatherings. Is there a way that we should sort of be thinking about these kind of family gatherings today, and also in moving forward?
Look, I think we're all God's children, and I love everybody, and I think people should be able to make their own decisions, and if they've chosen not to get vaccinated, they have done so at their own individual risk. They pose no risk to those who have immunity. We've just lost our bearings on this issue.
So remember, you have immunity by either having COVID or by getting a vaccination. So if you have it, you can be around whomever you want to be around, especially if they're unvaccinated, because you are, in fact, protected. So like, for instance, 30 people at a house, you're all sitting around a table, all 29 of you have a vaccine or have been vaccinated, one person hasn't. In terms of those 29 people, are they, in fact, protected from that one person?
That's right. Well, I mean, they have a risk of, let's say they're under age 50 and no comorbidity, of being hospitalized at a rate of, say, 1 in 100,000. Now, is that a risk that's acceptable? I would think so, because if you drive to get a vaccine, you have a greater risk of dying on the ride to get vaccinated. So, I mean, it doesn't end. There's no sense of an end to this. It's this percent. Let's be very honest. There's a strong vitriol to people who have chosen not to get vaccinated that comes from on high. Senior advisors to the White House House have said people who are unvaccinated should get tested twice a day at their own individual expense in perpetuity. I mean, that's not medicine. That's sad. It's very sad. And honestly, you know, when we talked about those survey results where up to half of America thinks that the risk of hospitalization from COVID is over 20%, 70% of people in this half of America, they belong to a political party. I won't say which one because I stay out of politics, but 70% of them believe that the risk of hospitalization from COVID is over 20%. 41% thought the risk of hospitalization if you get COVID is over 50%. It's 1%. Okay, it was then, and now it's 1 in 20,000 now that people are vaccinated. So people have a distorted perception of risk.
I do wade into political matters, so I'll go ahead and say it. These are the Democrats who believe and had this unnatural fear of COVID-19. I saw a medical doctor on Twitter who posted that she just wants to get back to normal and not have the fear of going to the grocery store with her 3-year-old child and putting her 3-year-old child at risk. I mean, that's lunacy, right? I mean, that's just insanity.
It's pathetic, to be honest with you, because let's assume COVID is eradicated. Will that doctor have the same feeling about influenza? Guaranteed that doctor has never vaccinated their kid for influenza, even though the kid was vaccine eligible in previous years.
And I wonder, like, what actually is happening? What is happening to us mentally?
There's a distorted perception of risk among public health officials and everyday doctors. And when I talk to them, I ask them this question. Has any healthy kid in the United States ever died? They can't tell you. They can't tell you what fraction of that. Because the CDC director was asked that question point blank. Many of us have asked her, but she was asked in the Senate hearing, and she says, I don't know. We don't know if every single child death was in a kid with a comorbid condition. So we actually have zero data on the risk to healthy kids. Zero. But yet they have very strong convictions on something where we have no data. So there's a mood, there's a group think right now in medicine, and it's led, from on high. I mean, Dr. Fauci is very influential among physicians because he's such a nice guy, and he's contributed a lot to medicine over the years. He's one of the authors of the big Harrison's Textbook of Medicine. He's done a lot of great things in his career. So when he says things, and especially when it's in retaliation of, another political view, people fall in line, even not understanding the data. I cannot believe the number of doctors I talk to on any of these topics and say, okay, I understand you're frustrated about this idea that I don't think kids should wear masks when there's less than 10 cases per 100,000 in the community. Where's the data? What's the data on masks? Well, and we see this with so many different aspects of COVID, and people are seeing through this kind of lack of data-driven decision-making right now.
So if words are violence, it sounds like this is a symptom of some bigger issue. So like if there's a danger in words and hyperbole in our society today, and if they're dangerous, then certainly other things are dangerous. So if words are violence, then COVID-19 is what?
Yeah, I think you're onto something really big there, and it's much larger than COVID. I think this is a much larger issue. COVID has become so stigmatized that doctors have actually refused to do transplant operations if somebody, say, has natural immunity, but they haven't gotten vaccinated. Okay, so are we going to stop taking care of people who eat too many potato chips, or people who have HIV, or people who broke a bone in the past from being a BMX bike racer and they come back with another broken bone? Are we going to say there were risks out there and you failed to listen to our guidance and therefore we're not going to take care of? People have lost their minds and they're not being consistent. If you're going to be consistent, do it all the way around.
And that's what I think most of us are looking for. We're looking for that consistency. But look, these lockdowns have created loneliness. We've seen drug overdoses explode. And the risk analysis portion of this, I feel like we significantly got the risk calculus completely wrong. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, this is the pandemic of lunacy that's accompanied the COVID-19 pandemic. And Amherst, Bryn Mawr College, I better stop there because I'm going to get lots of people reaching out to me. Georgetown University had a student so everyone's got to be fully vaccinated. You wear your mask. Every single environment is de-densified, and a lot of social activities are just canceled. At least that was the case at the other university I mentioned. But at Georgetown, they get tested frequently. Even though they're low risk, they'll maybe the lowest risk people on earth. They're fully vaccinated. They're wearing masks all the time. And then they get tested nonstop. Okay, so they're extremely low risk doing all these restrictions. They get tested. If you test positive with no symptoms, and by the way, we can pick up one dead virus particle in your nose now with the modern PCR test. You basically go to jail for 10 days. They tell you to report to campus police immediately, and you're escorted to a hotel room, and you're told you will be, have food dropped off in the morning, and that'll be enough food for the day, and you're not allowed to leave the room for 10 days. I mean, basically solitary confinement of a college, in a campus of all low-risk, fully vaccinated, masked people, and you have no symptoms. This is what people need to take a stand on, because there's no end in sight. They have the same risk with influenza, and influenza is going to come around next year. We're going to do the same thing. I'm talking to these kids all the time. They've called me, and they're like, Marty, we know you're speaking out on COVID right now. I've already had COVID, and I got an asymptomatic positive test result. Say something, get up, do something. And so I'm going to speak up on this issue. It's driving me crazy, and they have no voice. It's an abuse of power.
And by the way, I played the wrong answer there. That was actually to the question of, has he been following the stories and the requirements, the draconian measures that colleges and universities have been making kids follow? So that answers that question. As far as the question back to the risk analysis, did we get the risk calculus wrong? Here was Dr. Marty's answer.
I think we did. I think we're going to learn more about it. Now, when the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico recently, Hurricane Maria hit, there were initial reports that 17 people had died from the hurricane. A follow-up study was done and published in the New England Journal of Medicine that the real number, looking at the secondary outcomes that affected health, was 5,000 people died from that hurricane. People couldn't get food. People couldn't get water. People died of bacterial-borne illness. People died because their dialysis treatments had to abruptly end. And so we're going to learn a lot more. We just got the report on opioid deaths, 100,000. We've seen the substance abuse. All the letters and emails I get, parents calling, telling me their kid is on the brink of suicide. My cousin in Florida said one of his good buddies, his senior year of high school, committed suicide. Otherwise, life was going great. It was a year into COVID. I mean, something is going on here, and we're not capturing this in our national vital statistics. Deferred cancer care, that takes a couple years to compile that data. Now, it doesn't mean that we should have blown off COVID. Not by all means. I mean, look, I would call for the lockdowns. It was scary. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And then pretty soon it was pretty clear that it was very hard for this to hurt someone young and healthy. No one's talking about Sweden right now. Sweden is doing the best in the world. So there's some value to recognizing that we used an indiscriminate policy to lock everyone down when we should have done it selectively. We told everyone to stay at home, and guess what? They gained 17 pounds. And the number one risk factor for COVID that's common in the population is the metabolic syndrome from obesity, right? And so we've created these self-inflicted wounds on the way, and mental illness was one of them. When we told people indoors is better than outside, we got it backwards. We told people vaccinated immunity is better than natural immunity. They got it backwards. We told people to wash your hands like crazy for 20 seconds. You stop at 15 seconds, you feel guilty. Maybe I'm going to give someone COVID. You have to wash your hands for 20 seconds. It was aerosolized. We should have known that from SARS-CoV-1. So we made so many mistakes, and the thing that still kills me is we still tell people who are getting vaccinated for the first time to get their doses 3 and 4 weeks apart. Insane. The research has come out showing now that if you get the second dose at 3 months or longer, you get more durable immunity, lower side effect profile, and you probably don't need a booster. That's what I did for myself. So we continue to make so many of these mistakes. No one should be dying of COVID right now in America. Between all these therapeutics, and molnupiravir will come out in about 3 weeks, no one should be dying of COVID. So when you're asking about, say, the vaccine mandates, does it make a difference? If you tell someone you're required to wear a parachute when you jump out of a plane, maybe that makes sense. But now we're going to tell you you're only jumping out of the plane 15 feet and you're jumping onto a inflatable cushion. Totally changes the game. No one should be dying of COVID with these therapeutics, and that changes the calculus. But our old guard establishment is unable to pivot, and they've been unable to look at the collateral damage.
I told you there's a lot to be thankful for, and that right there might be the best news for you to really be thankful, more thankful than anything else that we've seen in a very long time. So Dr. Marty, exactly, can you tell us how exactly does this pandemic end?
So the emergency use authorization of molnupiravir will mark the end of the pandemic phase of this virus, and it will move to the endemic, a very low level, because that drug cut COVID deaths to zero, and that will have a significant impact on these daily deaths.
And is that the pill, Marty?
That's also a pill. Both Merck's drug, molnupiravir, and Pfizer's drug are both simple outpatient pills. You pick them up at the pharmacy. We've got a ton that are in storage right now. We should be using it, honestly, on a compassionate use basis right now, but the FDA and the pharma companies don't want to collaborate to make it available on a compassionate use basis. But no one's died in any of the trials who've gotten those drugs. So that'll mark the end of the pandemic phase officially. It'll be in December, and then into next year, you're going to see a lot of pushback on these restrictions because historically our government is very slow to remove restrictions. But you just saw DC Mayor announce no longer are masks going to be required. Now, no one would accuse her of being a conservative or light on COVID, but she's up for a re-election, and people are angry right now because they see very low-risk individuals forced to wear masks and do things, and they are ready to live their lives. So I do think we're going to see a major turn in sentiment and in policy right around the corner.
So as we go about, and you have to travel, Dr. Marty, what you're not saying is you're not saying that we should get on a plane, Delta, Southwest, wherever, and that we probably still don't need to or shouldn't fight our flight attendants. Is that what you're saying?
I'm a peaceful man. Yeah, I don't believe in violence or confrontation. So you will get probably arrested when the plane arrives in its destination. So no, we got to abide by the rules where the rules exist. But we do need people to question what's happening because we don't see that right now. We have groupthink, and it's not healthy for science, and it's not good for future pandemics. Because I'll tell you what, we are going to have major pandemics in our lifetime where we're going to need people to mask and be careful and do things that are not part of the routines, and they're not going to like it, and we're going to need to be tough with them as doctors. And we're losing so much credibility right now. When I say we're going to have future pandemics, that's not a prediction. Look at the pandemics we've had already. We've had H1N1, SARS, MERS, Ebola, Zika, polio up in 1955. I mean, we are definitely going to have more pandemics, and right now our credibility is going down the toilet with these excessive restrictions and the pandemic of lunacy that's accompanied the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic of lunacy. Think about that. The pandemic of lunacy. And that's where we are. We're now in a phase where we're basically in two pandemics. We're in the pandemic of COVID-19, and we are in the pandemic of lunacy. Before we go, I just want to jump back into one last time into the chat room to take a quick update on things. Let's see here. Fear God, West Bank. Has not much to do with science. It's politics. A lot of it has to do with politics. You're correct, West Bank. But don't throw out the science or the medical just because the politics aren't the way we like it. So medical people don't want it. So I think there's some medical people that do want it. Rob from Florida, or Rob FLA. I think that there are some that just like Dr. Marty said, some people are still looking at the data and they're not convinced by the data they've seen, or they haven't even read the data, so they're just going by sort of a gut feeling and what they're being told by the legacy media, as well as in other places. Rob FLA, happy Thanksgiving to all. Same to you, sir. And okay, West Bank, gotcha. Remember, a lot of times I try to bring to the table conversations that otherwise are going to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance, and we need to hear things in an open, non-threatening forum. And I thought that Dr. Marty was just a phenomenal example of that. So thank you to everybody who was in the chat room today. I really do appreciate you guys being there. And with that, we will call today to a close. Remember to oppose progressivism wherever it rears its ugly head and illuminate the light of truth. We'll see you next time.